talk about, which I just kind of told you guys to write down, but we just need to think about the relationship. So ladies and gentlemen, right now we're given a unit circle. You guys can just think of a unit circle. We're given these two values. We know the sine of 30 equals 1/2, and they tell us the tangent of 30 is equal to square root of 3 over 2, right? Correct? Okay, so we're given those values. Now, what we need to do when given those values is they want us to now figure out what are the rest of these values. So they ask us, what is the cosecant of 30 degrees? So we need to remember the cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, meaning the cosecant is the same thing as 1 over sine of 30 degrees. These are reciprocals of each other, right? We've been talking about that. If sine was y, the cosecant was 1 over y, right? These are reciprocals of each other. So all you're really going to do is just take the reciprocal. It's really 1 over 1/2, or just the reciprocal of 1/2, which is equal to what? 2. So just take the reciprocal. Since it's the same angle, they're just reciprocals of each other. And that's also when you guys look at the reciprocal identities that I told you guys to write down and copy down in your notes, you guys can see they're just reciprocals of each other. Now, what about the cosine? So actually, I'm going to go to cosine last. So we'll go back to cosine. The next thing is let's look at the cotangent. Now remember, we have tangent of 30 degrees. How is the tangent of 30 degrees related to the cotangent of 60 degrees? Do you guys remember? Rhymes with tunction. Yeah, both tunction, cofunctions, right? So how did if the cotangent of 60 degrees, that's equal to what? That's equal to the tangent of, right, the tangent of 90 minus 60, which is equal to the tangent of 30 degrees. And do we know what the tangent of 30 degrees is? Yeah, it's just square root of 3 over 2. Or I'm sorry, square root of 3 over 3. So we know that that's equal to each other. So that one was pretty easy. You just need to remember, that's why I'm telling you those relationships are so important. You need to know you need to know this cofunction identity. The cotangent of 60 is equal to the tangent of 30. All right? Now let's look at for the cotangent of 30 degrees. So now how is tangent and cotangent related to each other? Close. They're reciprocals of each other. So the cotangent is the same thing as 1 over the tangent of 30 degrees. So really all you're doing is taking the reciprocal. So you're going to have 3 over square root of 3. Right? You're just going to take the reciprocal of your tangent of 30 degrees. Well, we got to rationalize the denominator. So we get 3 radical 3 over 3. Something like that. All right. So you guys ready to go on to sine and cosine? Sine tangent? All right. So here's where it gets a little fun. All right. So we need to figure out what the cosine of 30 degrees is. Let's go back and remember on the unit circle, the sine of 30 degrees, why do we know it's 1/2? Because it's equal to what coordinate point? What does sine represent? The what? It does, but what is the, I'm trying to think of, just in general, it always represents which coordinate point, the x or the y? The sine. Sine represents the y, right? So we could say sine of t always represents the y coordinate, right? No matter what. For pi over 6, for pi over 3, for pi over 4, it always represents the y coordinate. Cosine always represented the x, and then tangent of t always represents the y over x, right? So now knowing that information, can we say that tangent of t is equal to sine of t divided by cosine of t? By using that information, sine of t is equal to y, cosine of t is equal to x. Tangent of t is y over x. Well, if y is the same thing as sine of t, and x is the same thing as cosine of t, can you say these things are equal? Yeah. So what is now, but we're not dealing with t though. We're actually dealing with tangent of 30 degrees, we know, and we know the sine of 30 degrees. And what are we trying to figure out? The cosine of 30 degrees, right? So, literal equation, solve for cosine of t. So we have to get it off the bottom. So you multiply by cosine of 30 degrees on both sides. So you have cosine of 30 degrees, which we don't know, times the tangent of 30 degrees, which was what? square root of 3 over 3 equals the sine of 30 degrees, which is 1/2. So you divide by square root of 3 over 3. So you say cosine of 30 degrees is equal to 1/2 divided by the square root of 3 over 3. Now, remember when I did that whole thing about tangents? I'm telling you, man, these fractions, they can get to you guys. But if you guys can just remember, how do you get rid of a fraction on the bottom? All you need to do is make sure you multiply by the reciprocal. So don't make it overly complicated. Just multiply by the reciprocal. Now I'm going to have to erase a little bit of this. If you guys already have it written down, or you can rewind and so forth. So when we look at it, multiplying by the reciprocal, we have the square, I'm sorry, not that. We have 3 divided by the square root of 3, 3 divided by the square root of 3. Well, any number multiplied by its reciprocal always goes to 1, right? Multiplies out to 1. Here we multiply across, we get 3 over 2 radical 3. However, we can't have that, we can't have a, so it's being divided by 1, which just means it's going to be up top. Now, we can't have a radical on the bottom, so I rationalize the denominator. So I get 3 radical 3 divided by 2 times 3. Those divide out to 1, radical 3 over 2. So the cosine of 30 degrees equals radical 3 over 2. Now, if you look at your unit circle, could you already know that cosine of 30 degrees equals square root of 3 over 2? Right? Yes. However, it's important to understand this because sometimes we're not going to be talking about the easy angles. Right? You guys are going to have to know how to kind of work that using it, because not all the time are we going to be dealing with 30, 60, 45 degree angles. All right? So it's important for you guys to understand how I solved that. The reason why how I solved it was the relationship between sine and cosine.
Pardon the interruption. Please check your TV set channel 3 for the website news.
Okay. I'm going to leave it at